Live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
All right, Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher is back for Mosher Mondays, doing a little house cleaning, a little rearranging for the offseason. Mosher, DeCecco, Kaplan on Friday. Inside the Birds podcast. That doesn't go away. Those guys are pumping out big-time material. And Moshe, I got to imagine this offseason will probably be almost more intriguing than this dumpster fire of a regular season.
Oh, Mike, I've always said that the offseason is, especially for our jobs, right, whether you're a sports talk radio host or a beat reporter or a podcast or anybody in the media, I think the offseason is infinitely more captivating from a storyline standpoint than the season, because it's always the unknown versus the known. The unknown is the offseason. What are they going to do with their coaching staff? Who's going to get hired? Who's going to get fired? Who's going to get drafted? Who's going to get signed? Who's going to get cut, released? I mean, during the season, there's really not a whole lot of guesswork. You see the story up close every week on Sunday and then talk about it Monday through Friday. But, the offseason will be compelling. It'll start very soon. It already has with the press conferences today. And I imagine that content creators like myself and yourself will be churning it out for quite a while.
Okay, so let's go with it was kind of an impromptu press conference today. It was a little bit of a surprise when I got the text message this morning that said not only Howie Roseman, but also Doug Pederson would speak together at 10:30. It was like, change the plans. Why is this? What was the biggest messaging of putting those two guys together today to talk?
Well, I don't know if it was intentional, but when you put a guy like Howie Roseman, who hasn't spoken in months, I mean, it feels like a year. He hasn't spoken probably since the end of camp, I think. At the same time as Doug Pederson, who speaks 4 times a week, then it's pretty clear that most of the questions are going to be geared toward Howie Roseman, just based out of so many more questions to ask and so much of his feel that you want to know about with why the season went haywire. And so if you compare that to last year where they had separate conferences, and again, before they actually met with Jeffrey Lurie, and you saw how Doug had to answer a lot of uncomfortable questions or questions that seemed comfortable at the time, but he clearly didn't have the same vision as Jeffrey Lurie and the higher-ups. And then he wound up saying things that he regretted less than 24 hours later. This time, there were so few questions for Doug, and the ones he did answer, he gave vanilla milquetoast answers to, that he didn't put himself in any incriminating positions or in the position where tomorrow he's going to wind up saying something or something's going to happen that's completely antithetical to what he said 24 hours prior. So I don't know if that was the strategy by getting them both together, but it sure seemed to reap that result as far as Doug really not having to say anything, and it limits the amount of questions that can be asked by reporters, and so nobody really was able to follow up with Doug on the future of his coaching staff. And so these are some questions that are on the table and will have to be answered in the next coming days.
Did you get any feel from Howie Roseman's the way he answered the questions regarding Carson Wentz and whether or not they would be open to moving him?
I felt like both of those guys artfully dodged any kind of controversy regarding Carson Wentz. I mean, it sounded like both of them, when asked, felt like it sounds like they were, showering praise on Carson Wentz and still reiterating their faith in him and their ability to come back and fix what went wrong with him. I mean, if you only listened to that press conference, Mike, and didn't know about the ESPN report, you would think that it was just a tough year for Carson Wentz and that the front office and the organization and the coaching staff has the full intention of bringing him back next year, rebuilding him and making him into the franchise quarterback that they thought he was. But unfortunately, there's context to this that just was not addressed.
Well, you mentioned the ESPN report, and I thought that this would be a good position for Carson Wentz to go up there and speak to the media, answer questions. He knows what's coming. What do you take away from him declining that opportunity today?
Well, I've seen it suggested, and I do think that there's some credence to this, that if Carson Wentz comes out and says the report is not true, then they just call him a liar, right? And then if he says it's true, then they call him a crybaby baby. He's kind of in a no-win situation there. But I think the fair conclusion to draw from this, Hunter, is that the report is true. That he is done with this organization, done with the head coach, wants out, would like to be traded. I believe the report said he's willing to even work with the team on, some kind of cap relief to make it happen. And so if that's the case, I have to operate under the assumption that that's true, that Carson Wentz has played his final down, unless this team can somehow convince him to change his mind or to feel differently. But how do they do that? I mean, once you've gone this far and have these reports out there and you don't even issue a statement saying it's not true. I mean, I don't see how you can put the genie back in the bottle. And if this is the case, I think now you sit here and you look at the Eagles and you just wonder, what is the future for this franchise? Are they really about to be on another starting quarterback next year where you can only hope that he plays at a really high level and the coaches do a good job coaching him? I mean, I feel like the franchise is in a major crossroads right now.
Well, you kind of went right to where I wanted to go. Does that mean Jalen Hurts is the guy? Do you have the 6th overall pick? Do you think about, if you do get rid of Carson Wentz, maybe going down the road of drafting a quarterback this season? I mean, if Carson Wentz is not going to be here, are those your two realistic options? Drafting a quarterback, or did you specifically, you individually, see enough out of Jalen Hurts to say, we can rock with this guy?
Well, unfortunately, my opinion doesn't matter. You know, I saw 4 starts like everybody else. I saw some good things. I saw some things that need work. I believe that he showed he can play in this league. Did he show that, some kind of instantaneous success that you think he can be a top 5 quarterback or a perennial playoff quarterback? That's hard to say. I mean, I'm going to say I didn't see that, but I've also be the first to acknowledge that 4 starts, I don't think is in the context that he was thrown in. I don't know that if you could have asked for much more from Jalen Hurts. So I credit the kid for giving what he's got, but this really isn't about Jalen Hurts more so than this organization now having to face the reality that they're not going to have Carson Wentz and that they have to get Jalen Hurts prepared. You're right. They have a high pick. They could draft a quarterback. There's a lot of unknown right now. I don't even know what the coaching staff's going to look like to be able to answer the question. But I think that the context that we do have, Mike and Hunter, is that we know that the owner was involved in the draft, and we know that he and Howie Roseman told you why they drafted Jalen Hurts, and we know analytics has been a big part of it. So if they're ready to move on to Jalen Hurts, then if that's the case, then I guess that's the direction this franchise is headed in. But
okay.
That also
let's stop right there real fast. And we just had Andrew Brand on, who has done a lot of work on this, and has basically said they cannot get rid of this guy. The only way to fix this problem is to fix him. That was his direct quote. Fix him is what he said. You cannot release him, and there will not be enough in a trade. In other words, he doesn't think there's enough value. They're not going to get an offer that's going to knock their socks off to say, yeah, you know what, we'll just give you him for a 4th-round pick, because teams know that he wants out. So do you feel that Wentz is on this roster when the season starts?
I mean, all I have, Mike, is my information right now to go with, and Carson Wentz has made it known he wants out. And is he going to come back disgruntled under his contract and have to be forced to play and be forced to, play for a coach that right now he does not, seem to want to have a relationship with? That's a whole lot to ask. I mean, I have also seen, and I respect the heck out of Andrew Brandt, but I've also seen some people in the league, including Joe Banner, I believe, say that it can be done. It's not going to be pretty, but you can take that kind of a cap hit on a quarterback when you're moving forward with a quarterback who's making very little money. It's not going to be great. It's not ideal. Clearly, the Eagles have cap issues, and building around Jalen Hurts for the next year or two is going to be difficult without much money to patch holes. But what are the Eagles going to do? I mean, if Carson Wentz doesn't want to play for them, they can't force him to play.
Today, Jalen Hurts spoke, and he mentioned things about how he loves being coachable, how he's a competitor. It was almost as if everything we want Wentz to say, he said. Do you put any stock into that? Like, is he taking shots? Because it feels that way. It honestly does.
Yeah, I don't know. That would just be kind of reading tea leaves. Sometimes that's easy to do. Sometimes it's not. He is a coach's kid. He's always seemingly saying the right things and having platitudes about being a competitor or wanting to be a coffee bean or the sun is going to shine better tomorrow. I mean, that seems to be his kind of thing to say. So I just think that he wants an opportunity like any quarterback would. And if it turns out that, he's number one QB on the depth chart, he's going to do everything he possibly can to get himself ready to go.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Don't forget the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, off-season schedule, is it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 a.m. still?
Still up until the playoffs and the Super Bowl, and then we'll probably change to 2 a week.
Okay. Well, we will, of course, keep everybody up to date on that. I encourage you all to follow them on Twitter and make sure that you make that a daily routine. Listen to the Inside the Birds podcast and then the guys right here during Football at 4. So, obviously, the Wentz decision is the biggest one that they have. They have to decide whether or not they can bring him back. Do they want him to play? But let me ask you this. If he's back, do you see a scenario where there is a fair and open competition?
No. And by the way, I don't think there should be if he's back. If you're going to dedicate your offseason plan to firing some guys, rearranging your coaching staff, bringing in specific coaches whose idea who are brought in to quote unquote fix the quarterback, rebuild the quarterback, then and you're still that heavily invested from a contractual standpoint to Carson Wentz, and he's here, then everything should be geared toward getting Carson Wentz back toward the franchise quarterback level. If he, after being fixed, after all the tutelage, after all the mentoring, if he gets off to a terrible start and he's clearly not going to be the Carson Wentz they want him to be, well, then that's why you have Jalen Hurts there. He's a young kid. He can start the season on the bench for a little bit and then take over if he's ready to go. But, I mean, you can't – I think it's duplicitous and silly to think that you're going to bring in all these people to fix Carson Wentz and then call it an open competition in training camp. I think there's very few scenarios that are truly open competitions in training camp. Even the one, if you guys remember, in Chip Kelly's first year between Michael Vick and Nick Foles, that was billed as an open competition, but it never was. When Michael Vick re-signed to come back to the team, he was told he was going to be the starter. The fact that Chip Kelly went, with this kind of public roost was on Chip Kelly and his staff, but that was never really a competition.
Are you hearing anything about what they're going to do when it comes to reshaping this offensive side of the football? Because we know about Jim Schwartz and what they're doing with that. They're going to have to go with a new defensive coordinator. But bringing back Howie Roseman and Doug Pederson, which it seems they are going to do, they're going to have to make a change. The offensive part of this team was a problem. We keep hearing about new wide receiver coaches every single year. At what point is it going to be bigger than that?
Well, Hunter, yeah, let's see, because I think that people are, and we talked about this in the podcast today, I think people are making a little bit of an assumption, and I get why. I mean, when you see the GM and the head coach have a press conference today, you just figure, hey, they're all coming back. But what we also know is that today's exit interview day. I believe tomorrow is the day that Jeffrey Lurie will meet with Doug Pederson to go over the staff. What I expect is that Jeffrey Lurie is going to want some major changes on the offensive staff. Will Doug Pederson
again
be – go ahead.
Again.
Yes, again, exactly. Will Doug Pederson again be open to making these changes? All right. If he is, well, then I guess you have a new coaching staff again, and Doug Pederson is still your head coach. If he's not, you may have a situation where both sides say, well, listen, if you're not willing to meet what our vision is for the coaches and perhaps what this a new offensive coordinator and what his responsibility will be, then maybe we need to go separate ways. So I'm before I'm making anything declarative in my mind, I got to see Doug come out of this meeting and basically say I'm still the head coach of this team.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Neville, do you see a scenario at pick number 6 that they would draft a quarterback?
I think any scenario has to be on the table at this point until we get more concrete information about the future of this team. But I will go back to what I said about Jalen Hurts. He was picked for a reason. I know it is true. They did not envision Carson Wentz completely bottoming out, but they liked this kid more than other franchises did. That's why they drafted him in the second round. So we know the owner is more involved in these kind of decisions than he has been in the past. So, would they draft a quarterback if the owner is really high on Jalen Hurts and the GM is really high on Jalen Hurts? I don't know. I would tend to say I doubt it, but again, we need to hear more from this top brass on what the plan is for the future.
The national media definitely jumped down the Eagles' throats for yesterday's look of the game. What are your thoughts on how it played out? I think we all understand what it meant in terms of the draft pick, but the visual of it was tough.
I do think it's one of those things where the visual is actually tougher than the actual crime itself. I mean, there are plenty of teams that play backups in the 1:00 games on the last week of the season, and if this game itself was at 1:00 and the exact same scenario happened, I don't think it would have been such a big deal. But it was prime time; everybody was watching. The Giants started tweeting, and it is a bad look. I mean, they clearly were doing what they can to try not to win the game, and that's a bad look all around.
I want to get your thoughts on some of the other things. First off, Alshon Jeffrey, Malik Jackson both had their contracts restructured today. Mm-hmm. We've talked so much about the cap problems this team has, and they're going to have to get creative. What is the decision and the reasoning behind? What does this do for them?
So what it does for the team really is and for the player, it accelerates the timeline that Howie Roseman's going to use to cut them. He's not going to have them hanging around on the books for a little bit and then, kind of release them out of training camp because, they don't need them and they're trying to cut ties and save some salary. It's going to force them to cut them early. And both Malik and Alshon Jeffrey, like most free agents, want to be free agents now and not in the summer after teams have already spent their money. You want to be finding your next employer and your next paycheck sooner rather than later for obvious reasons. And so this restructure is going to enable that.
I guess then my question would be, is this a wow, what a move by Howie. Like, why would Alshon and Malik Jackson take these? What did they get to restructure their deals?
Well, they're getting the knowledge that they know they're going to be cut pretty soon here and be free agents in March, and then not later in the, not wait until May or June. A lot of teams hold on to guys and then cut them. You see it all the time. Guys get cut way later than the April or March free agency timeline, and then it becomes a situation where they're kind of scratching and clawing whatever money is left in free agency.
A name I'm just thinking about when you bring up Alshon is Deshaun Jackson and maybe cutting him next season. Does this maybe show that they're thinking about bringing him back, or is this too early to say?
It's probably too early to say right now, Hunter. I would think it's too early. There's definitely going to be a lot of difficult decisions, although I don't know if releasing Deshaun Jackson at this point is a difficult decision, but there are going to be some high-priced veterans that the team has to make some difficult decisions on, and probably sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, now I want to bring this scenario up to you because I want to say it was Adam Kaplan, but I don't want to put these words in his mouth. But 2012, I think he's on the show, and we're talking about this horrible team. And I thought it was Adam, but again, it was 8 years ago, so I could be wrong. And I believe the thought that he had mentioned was, I talked to people inside that organization, and they felt if the offensive line wasn't – remember, that team had 4 of 5 starters hurt that year, if you remember.
Yes.
They went 4-12, and the next year they won 10 games. Does this team say, you know what, if we have Brandon Brooks and Lane Johnson and Andre Dillard, we are not winning 4 games? So – do they look at this team and say, we've got some pieces right here in our building?
Well, I think they can and should. I mean, I think it's very fair to say that if Lane Johnson's your starting right tackle and Brandon Brooks is your starting right guard next year and Isaac Seumalo is either your starting left guard or center, that's 3 out of 5. That's pretty good. And then what we've seen with Jordan Mailata to be able to come in and continue to improve is another good thing. I think Jack Driscoll is a kid that they really like, and in the time we saw him out there, we at least saw him hold his own. So, yeah, I mean, I think the team should feel pretty good in that as it goes to the future, if the offensive linemen stay healthy, then they do have good talent on this team. I mean, if nobody went into this year thinking this team was only going to win 4 or 5 games. Nobody said this is the Jacksonville Jaguars kind of roster or a Jets kind of roster. So there are some talented players. But the one thing that I scratch my head at, Mike, is that ever since getting rid of Donovan McNabb, Jeffrey Lurie has constantly talked about wanting that franchise quarterback. You need that franchise quarterback. And it's just staggering that they had that guy, and just 2 years ago they signed him to a really long, lucrative contract. And here we are now talking about, well, that guy's probably not going to be back. And who's the next guy up in line? Is it Jalen Hurts? Is it somebody they draft? I mean, that's really incriminating for the franchise, I think.
Geoff, you've covered this team, ever since I've known you. I mean, how long now? 10 years?
Yeah, it's been quite since 2005. So we're going on 15 years here.
Okay. So you're plugged in. You have good sources. You know this team. You know this organization. Did you have any indication that Wentz and Pederson had a fractured relationship? Or is this like Sunday morning, 11 o'clock? Whoa, this is news.
Well, I mean, I think we have talked on the podcast and then even here in the radio show a lot this year about the concept of how hard Carson likes to be coached and how hard he is coached and whether or not Pederson is willing to be confrontational the way, say, John DeFilippo was, right? I mean, they butted heads, DeFilippo and Wentz, but eventually it wound up getting some pretty good play out of Carson Wentz in 2016 and especially 2017. So, I think you'd have to kind of I don't know. I'm not there in the building, so I don't know.
Well, nobody is.
Exactly what fractured relationship mean. Is it that Doug tried to get through to Carson this year and couldn't, and then when he benched him, Carson just got so offended by it that he can't overcome it? That's a little different from viscerally hating a guy who's coaching you. It's more like not trusting or not feeling supported. So that's how I feel Carson is feeling right now, that he just did not have the full support of the organization for a whole number of reasons. But I think it's also fair to wonder if Carson's reacting this way because people are trying to get him to be a certain way and do things for his own betterment, and he's resisting it.
Right. I mean, have you ever, come across or heard that he is stubborn and difficult to coach?
Yeah.
That the coaches are essentially don't want to deal with him anymore.
I haven't heard that the coaches don't want to deal with him. I have heard that Carson's a stubborn guy. He likes things a certain way. And, I don't think Carson, I can tell you just in speaking to some people within the organization that, not everybody's looking at what's happened to him this year and what's happened lately in the press and thinking that this is a good reflection of Carson Wentz.
There's so much more to get into, obviously, which we will do during Football at 4 this week. Now, I'm looking at a couple of mock drafts. I just want to throw this out real quick. Micah Parsons, linebacker, is losing the game in that embarrassing enough of a fashion worth taking a linebacker at number 6?
I can't believe you're even asking me that, Mike. You've covered this team for, in your way as long as I have. I mean, you know that they have that's probably the last guy on their list that they're going to take with a top 6 pick.
I agree with you, and I'm laughing because I just looked at 1, 2, 3 mock drafts, and all 3 of them had Micah Parsons.
Yeah, I'm shocked every single year when I see mock drafts that have the Eagles taking a middle linebacker. As long as the current people are in place calling the shots like Howie and his staff, I'd be absolutely stunned and surprised. This organization places so much priority, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, actually, on the defensive line, the offensive line. You're talking about pass rushers, tackles, quarterback, obviously, and we'll see about cornerback because I know there'll be some decent corners. They haven't taken one that high pretty recently. But if you're a betting person, I would bet on offensive line or pass rusher before any other position.
So does that rule out the wide receiver?
That's a great question, Hunter. If they're going best player available, certainly Devontae Smith and Jamar Chase are going to be there. I guess it just at that point matters where they have those guys graded in terms of the top offensive tackle, the Oregon kid, right? Or the top pass rusher. I know there's a kid from Miami who's pretty good. So we'll see.
Yeah,
I don't want to rule it out.
But. Yeah, I just hate that people don't want to go down that road because they say, well, you missed on it so many times. But if he's the right guy, you have to do it. You can't just miss the guy because you missed on other opportunities.
Yeah, I'd never subscribe to that theory. I'm best player available to an extent. Obviously, if you have a great quarterback, you don't have to take one. But if Jamar Chase or Devontae Smith is their best player on the board, then they should take him because what do they got going into next year? They have Jalen Reagor, Travis Fulgham, and Greg Ward. I mean, that's not going to be that doesn't make anybody say, oh man, we don't need help at wide receiver. Not at all. I mean, certainly one of those two receivers, if they're there, would be an upgrade to this receiver core.
All right, Mosher's back on Wednesday. DeCecco's here tomorrow. I know DeCecco is probably foaming at the mouth to talk draft. So we will get some thoughts on what this roster might need from him. Don't forget the Inside the Birds podcast Wednesday morning, 6 a.m. with Jeff and Adam. And, of course, Adam's here on Friday. It is a sports bash. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Looking forward to a great offseason, man.
Thanks, fellas. I'm looking forward to it, too.
Absolutely. And he, like August, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline